Thank you all for joining us. We have quite a few tonight. Earlier, I had somebody ask, I signed up for this a long time ago. I forgot what it is. But tonight we're going to be really talking about is the learner profiles. What you're running into is, I don't know if you've heard, and we'll have a little more questions about it, but we call it the PNL Pedagogy Series. That is the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. So Portrait of a Nevada Learner Pedagogy series. There are going to be 12 topics between now and the end of the school year. And you happen to hit the first one, which is learner profiles. So again, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kim Loomis. I am the former director of online and blended learning in Clark County School District. Most of you I know are from Clark County, so thank you for joining us. So you may have heard my name. I've been around for a long time. I was in the classroom for 10 years as a high school math teacher. I coached boys and girls soccer. I also wrote a book, and it's really a lot about what happened here in Clark County. It was Think Outside the Box, the CIA of blended learning, and some of the ways that we were using digital content, which is my love. And you're going to see that love and passion come out tonight as we talk about things. So I do consult now as a I3 digital PD. This is actually a program designed by your state Department of Education. You guys are so lucky. Joan Ebert, superintendent, absolutely love her, was my mentor when we were in Clark County. We were former math teachers together. We worked on the virtual high school together. We worked in technology together. We worked at the virtual high school is what it was called at the time. Now it's called Nevada Learning Academy, together before she moved on to New York. And then actually, I'm so glad that she's back as our superintendent here in Nevada. All right, today's agenda. Guys, we're going to talk a little bit about the Portrait of a Nevada Learner because I want you to really take hold of this and get a good understanding of it. And then we're going to get deep into understanding our students and the learning process and how to help our students take ownership of their learning via the learning profiles. Now, y'all got an invite to the Canvas Extended Workshop. That is an additional resource that you can take advantage of. You can look through it like a magazine, or you can engage with it and get some additional credits. So we'll talk more about that at the end of this evening. So I got a question for you up in chat. Have you seen the Portrait of a Nevada Learner? A lot of no's popping up. Breaks my heart, but I'm so glad you're here tonight. I am so glad because you're going to spend some time looking at this and really thinking about how to bring this portrait of a Nevada learner into your classroom. And you guys are probably doing a lot of this stuff already, but it's really going to have us reflect and think through what that looks like. When we have nearly 80 participants in this room and I see this many no's, oh, I'm so glad you're all here tonight. So let me tell you a little bit about the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. So about a year and a half ago, about 200 Nevadas, and I happen to be part of that group. We got together in October of 2022. KnowledgeWorks was working with the State Department of Education, putting together what they thought competency-based education can look like and what do we need for that. So this is actually years of work before we had this gathering in October of 2022, where we had probably 200 people in that room that really talked about what do we think the students need in the state of Nevada to be successful. Well, then they had a youth participation board in January. Then they had 1,400 different inputs on surveys and people. They even had a fellowship of teachers that really thought through what should a Nevada learner look like. So finally, in the month of May of this year, they put together the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. So let me give you guys the website up in chat. So what they did is they put together this portrait. Now, there are 4 things when we think about it that when we're thinking about the students is, the student's point of view, that portrait is, how can I thrive? How can I contribute and make an impact? How do I build and sustain relationships? And how do I grow in my learning? Now, this is a collection of not only just skills, but also the academics. We want to have that balance between both the academics, the quality math, English, social studies, and science, CTE, all of that. But we also want to build these skills so that we have these learners that are lifelong learners, not just in math, English, social studies, and science, but they know how to thrive. They know how to make an impact. They know how to create relationships. They know how to continue to grow in their learning. And that's what the portrait does, is it really kind of focuses in on 4 different inputs. Now, if you haven't found it, I'm going to go ahead and put this one also up in chat. There's a 1-page PDF that it looks exactly like what you're seeing on the screen now. So it talks about the 4 different categories, like the empowering, Like, how, if I'm a student, how do I empower myself and grow in my learning? Well, that's going to cause curiosity, self-awareness, thinking about reflection and striving for balance. And so you can see those things that would help a student become an empowered learner. That second one there is connecting. Now, we talked about community and relationships. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like the 4 C's. And we have that webinar, that course coming up, I think in the next term, in the spring term. But it's really about, how do I collaborate? How do I communicate? How do I have empathy and respect for diverse populations? So when we're thinking about this learner, how do we empower them? How do we help them connect? How do we help them make impacts? So students want to contribute. We all want to contribute. We want to make, purposeful impact in the world. Well, how do we do that? Well, we have to be critical thinkers. We have to be creative problem solvers. We have to be civic in our engagements. And I think, that's how we make impact, to help students learn that they live in a society and what they do affects other people. How do they create impact? And that goes back to our connecting and our empowering. But that last category is thriving. As a learner, how do I thrive? How will I know that I'm thriving? Well, thriving means resilience. It means being courageous. It means taking risks, making intellectual agility, and having integrity about learning and the things that you're doing. So when you think about this Nevada portrait, and I know this is the first time for a lot of you to see it, and we're going to spend a lot more time over the 12 series really getting deeper into it. But I want you to think about, what are we doing in our classrooms? That's what this whole series is about, is what are we doing in our classrooms that are helping students to reflect, be curious, be self-aware, be collaborative, be purposeful in their impacts, be critical thinkers, be, resilient and courageous. So when we're thinking about the pedagogy, the lessons that we put forward, how are we helping our students empower, connect, impact, and thrive? And those are really what we're really trying to build as we move forward in this series of 12 webinars. What we're going to do is we're going to take the next 5 minutes and we're going to just dive in. You're going to have about 3 or 4 of you guys in each room to talk about, what skills or mindsets do you think will be most difficult to help build in a student? And you've got the websites there to go back and look at. Welcome back. Welcome back. Hopefully you guys had some really good conversations in your breakout rooms. I tried to keep the breakout rooms small so that you could have those great conversations. How about we go up into chat and throw up some of the things that actually came up in your conversation? What are some of those things that are going to be most difficult to help our students create? Perseverance, empowering. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Thriving. Yes, that's that perseverance, right? Motivation. We're at the right place, because tonight we're going to really talk about learner profiles and how to help students take ownership of their learning. What we don't want to do is take education and make it passive. And I think that that's what that portrait of a Nevada learner really does, is it helps us as teachers to think about our pedagogy, the way that we're designing our lessons and the way that we're implementing learning in our classroom, to think about, are we helping kids being empowered? Are we helping them connect? Are we helping them to thrive? Are we helping them to do all the things that we would like to do, that, that creating the ownership things? So as we think about tonight and as we go through these things, I want to start with the core business of schools, because I truly believe that the core business of schools are relationships and learning. And that is hierarchical. Relationships come before learning, because I got to tell you, I had kids in my classroom, and I taught high school math for 10 years. And I knew that there were kids in my classroom that I pissed off for some reason, and they weren't going to learn that day, because I affected the relationship. So it affected the learning. So the stronger the relationship we have, the stronger learning that we can have in those types of settings. So as you're thinking about what's the core business for school, think about relationships and learning. And when we think about the culture of learning in our classrooms, there are 3 main areas that the culture is built upon. Relationships is the strongest part. And that's that first part that I always talk about. And it's not only just the relationship you have with your individual students, but it's also the relationships among your students. So you talked about that connecting. What are we doing in our pedagogy, in our lessons, that are connecting students? And the structures that we have in our classroom, like the classroom routines, like I like to do callbacks. If I say must Mustang, you say mighty, or whatever, whatever the callback is. If you can hear me clap once, if you can hear me clap twice, right? It goes through those routines that you have. Maybe you have a social contract in your classroom where you had your students and you decide on what was the best way to treat each other with respect and all of those things. And you have designed classroom lessons that are engaging and relevant based on academic standards. The piece that oftentimes gets missed is the third piece, and it's that piece that's at the bottom. It's the process. It's that intentional focus on the process of learning. And I don't mean for us, because we know the process of learning. Shoot, we went to college. Most of us have master's degrees about the process of learning. But have we shared that with our students? And tonight, I'm really going to have you guys think through, what have you been intentionally focusing on in the process of learning with your students? Now, the student-teacher relationship, we know that that is very, very strong in helping with academic success, right? If a kid likes you, he's more likely to come to school. What it does is it helps them say, hey, I want to do good because I want Miss Loomis to feel good about me, right? It's that honoring of you as a teacher when we have that strong student relationship. It also helps us to help our students set and make goals. It's like, hey, Susan, what are you thinking about? We're having a quiz this week. What kind of grade do you want to have on that quiz? All right. So what do we need to do to get there? Because we have that relationship, we can have that conversation with our student. Think about what activities and assignments that you are currently using right now to get to know your students. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you again. So I'm sure that you guys are already doing things in your classroom. You have activities and assignments that help you to get to know your students. But we're going to talk tonight is helping our students to get to know themselves as learners. So that's what we're going to head into now. So we're helping students to take ownership of their own learning. So a moment ago, we talked about relationships and, relationships with students and among students, and having structures like social contracts and engaging classroom activities. But it's that process, that intentional focus on the process of learning that I want to spend the next 30 minutes of really talking about. And how do we take that back into the classroom? Because if you think about the portrait of a Nevada learner, it really hinges on them understanding that they're a learner. So when we're in our classrooms, some of the times that when we want to set expectations, I want you to ask yourselves, okay, just ask. You don't have to throw it up in chat. If you want to, you're more than welcome to use chat to kind of think about this. Have you ever asked your students what the definition of learning is? Have you ever asked your students what they thought your role is as a teacher, or what their role is as a student or as a learner? I think it was when I was in Alaska. They don't even use the term teacher or instructor. What they use the term is lead learner. All the students are called learners, and the teacher or the instructor is called the lead learner. So that reminds the students that in the classroom, we are all learning. But we need to define what is learning. I remember I was talking to a teacher one time, and she said, I asked my students what is learning and the definition of learner. And they said, well, I'm supposed to show up, I'm supposed to be quiet, and I'm supposed to not create behavior problems. That's what they thought their role of being a student was. And so it's like, take some time and just ask your students, what's the definition of learning? I would love to know what they think the definition of learning is. I would love to know what the students think their role, what they believe is their role, and what your role is. Because I don't know about you, I come back and I have dinner with my kids, and sometimes I would ask them, I'm like, what'd you learn today at school? I didn't learn anything. My teacher doesn't do what they're supposed to do. Now, I know what that teacher does. That teacher is a really kinesthetic, hands-on, wants the kids to take ownership, but my kids are sitting back like, just fill me up, I'm a cup. And so they don't understand. There's a mismatch in what they think the teacher's role is and what they think their role is. So really important, take some time to really establish that co-creators of learning. You are a guide in their learning path. You set up the trail. You blaze this trail for them with your lessons, with the pedagogy you bring through, but it's their journey. It's what efforts they put in and what they get out is from their efforts, not from what you've done, right? But we're co-creating. We can look at their efforts and say, oh, you know what? That student is a kinesthetic learner and this activity is too auditory for them. So we can look at those types of things, but we want the kids to understand that we are co-creators of this learning process. So let me ask you this. Go ahead and go into chat. Have you ever seen the learning pit? And not only have you seen it, have you taught it to your students? This comes from James Nottingham's books called The Learning Challenge. And this helps us teach our students about the learning process, right? So if we think about learning, learning is about being able to understand, I don't know something. And I have to be comfortable enough to take this risk, to take a leap of faith into a pit of no knowledge, like no knowledge of what that looks like. So I'm down in this pit and I'm like, I don't know anything about this. And then I need to think about what strategies it's going to take for me to climb out of this pit that I'm going to learn through. Problem solving, asking a peer, Googling it, looking for patterns. What are those strategies that I need to do, the hard work that I need to put in so that I can climb out of this pit and I can get to understanding? I love it. We got a couple people over here that says, yep, I've seen this. It's called the dip in my classroom. The key here is to help our students understand learning is knowing that you don't know something. So if you understand you don't know something, what is it going to take to know something? So prime example, I went to the Women's World Cup in Australia this summer and we were around a bunch of people and there was this family behind us and they're like, we don't know anything about soccer, but we just came here because we live in Australia and it's here in Australia. So let's take a bit of it. So they understood about, hey, let's learn about soccer. They took the leap of faith. They bought some tickets and went to the game. They were at the bottom of the game. And they're like, I don't understand offsides. What does this look like? How come there's no timeouts? All of those things, but working together by talking to the people around them and just figuring it out. They got to the top and not only, guess what? They said, hopefully we'll see you at the next game. So understanding what that pit, or like some of you are saying in chat, what that dip looks like. We need to really help our kids understand that. So let me ask you this over in chat. Have you shared the learning process, either the definition of learning or the roles that each of you have, or even the dip or learning pit with your students? You can throw a yes or a no up in the chat. Good. It's good balance here. Yeses and nos. And as we look through those, I wonder if they would split between elementary and secondary, because sometimes at secondary, and I spent 10 years at the secondary school, we just assume they already know that. And then as little learners, we know that they need to know that. So some of our elementary teachers tend to do that. So the key is to make sure that everybody's on the same page when they come into your classroom. And I think that that's what the portrait of a Nevada learner says, is let's all look at where we want to be and how to get there. So again, that's us looking at the pedagogy, us defining what learning looks like, us defining what our roles are, and helping our students understand that, yeah, they're going to go into this dip, or what we call a pit, where they don't know anything. And we're going to crawl out of that by using some really good strategies to get to our learning process. So when we do that, we're shifting the student ownership. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, no longer are you that shell and I'm going to come fill you up. That's doing, right? That's doing when the students just complete the work and they act accordingly. So they look like they're engaged, but they're just doing. If you ask them, they can tell you what they're doing. Well, I'm working on this worksheet, or I'm reading this story. They can tell you what they're doing because they're doing it. But what we want to do is we want to shift a little bit over. We want them to move to understanding, where they're actively thinking and reflecting on what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I'm working on this. I'm reading this literature, but in this literature, what I'm looking for is characteristics of the hero and characteristics of the heroine. So they know what they're doing and why they're doing it, because they want to look for those things that are going to push them to understanding why they're doing it. When we get to ownership, that's not only knowing what they're doing. Oh, I'm working on this worksheet. Knowing why they're doing it, because after I get this worksheet, I'll have the understanding to be able to do this science lab. but also how they're doing it. We're working in groups because I need to pose questions to my neighbors to make sure that we all understand before our group goes and does the science lab. So they know the what, the why, and the how. They can explain the strategies and how they're going to do it. When I go into classrooms, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll ask a student, hey, what are you working on? And most of the time they can tell me what they're working on. But if I ask them, why are you working on that? A handful of students, a handful, and I really do mean a handful, just a couple of students can tell me why. Well, last week we read a story and this is how it builds on this story, or next week we're going to be doing this project and so they're telling me why they're doing it. But very few of them can say, well, you know what, the how I'm doing it. How are we learning? Well, sometimes I'm going to have to do, guess and check. Sometimes I'm going to have to go ask my neighbors. Sometimes I'm going to have to go do some research. So that's how they're doing it. And then thinking about how they can use that strategy in other places. I might use guess and check a lot in mathematics, but why am I not using guess and check in science and social studies and English as well? I don't want them to think about one strategy as something that's only in the doors of one content area. So thinking that shift of ownership is going from doing to understanding to owning it. So that's changing not only our mindset and changing our classroom pedagogy, we also have to change the students' mindset, which means that they have to start thinking of themselves as active agents. They can no longer be passive consumers. They have to be their own decision makers and creators. They can't just sit back and be receptors. We've talked about growth mindset for years and fixed mindset, but what we really need to do is help our kids move away from compliance oriented to collaborative. That connecting part of the Nevada portrait of a learner is really about connecting and understanding and thriving and just being engaged in the learning. And being engaged in the learning, it means understanding the learning process. So when Chicago did some research, they said there are 4 mindsets that are so important for student agency and ownership. And these are those 4 mindsets. Their research says, look, students have to believe that their ability and competency grows with their effort. That's growth mindset, right? They have to believe that. They also have to believe that they belong to this academic community. So again, that's us part of creating that culture. Go back to those 3 things: relationships, right, that we start at the top, the community, as well as the process, is understanding that they understand that they're part of that community. And that's why it's so important for us to have those connections. And then they have to believe that their work has value, not for anybody else, but for them. It has value for them. This work has value for me, and that I can succeed at this work. These could be 4 mantras that actually hang on your wall. And one day you say, let's pick one. And we're all going to say it 3 times over. I can succeed at this. I can succeed at this. I can succeed at this. Or I belong to this academic community. I belong to this academic community. Saying it over and over again, because not only seeing it, but saying it becomes a belief. It becomes something that we own, something that we can take in. And that mindset is what we're trying to change with our students. That portrait of a Nevada learner is really about changing mindsets, moving from not only just academics, but the skills that come with those academics. As businesses have been complaining for a long time, we're not building those skills. Well, this is a way for us to think about our classroom pedagogy and help our students with those skills so that they can articulate what they're learning, why they're learning it, and what strategies they're using, and when they might use those strategies again in the future, right? So that doing, understanding, and owning becomes so important when students take ownership. And when we're trying to get them to that portrait of a Nevada learner, we really want to get them to that how and when. So how does this change our classroom pedagogy? We know what teacher-led looks like. It's directed, it's the majority of the lessons, the students are compliant, they're doing everything. But what we want to do is we want to move that over. We want to shift the facilitation more to a guided or a lead learner, where students start experimenting with their ownership of learning. And when students start feeling comfortable with that ownership of learning, and we've defined what learning is, and we've defined what our roles are, and we've defined what the pit is, and we've created these safe environments, when students have the ability to move to that area to take ownership, That's when we start become co-facilitators of learning in the exchanging of ideas and strategies, and we're doing it together. Let's go to what we all came here for tonight, which is a learner profile. And I hope you all choose to make a learner profile. You will find my learner profile actually in the Canvas course with these slides. So what we're doing when we're creating learner profiles is we're moving to a student-centered learning. What we're doing is changing from passive receivers to active participants and creating independence and fostering lifelong learning. That's what the Portrait of a Nevada Learner does. It helps us create effective uses of not only the tools that we have on our hands, which is great because we have all these great things like technology in our hands to help students meet their learning goals. I can set up a small group where somebody over there is working on iReady, and this small group over here is working on a hard book that they're looking through and reading, and this small group over there is journaling. So I can balance that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and you're going to hear me talk more about the thirds in some of our later courses with technology, teacher, and student. So when we think of moving our students to these skills that we want the kids to have down the line, it makes me think of what the business world also does. What they do on job applications, they want to what knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have. And so you'll hear the KSAs. You'll hear that sometimes in the business world. They'll say, what are the knowledge that you have, what skills you have, and what abilities you have? And sometimes people confuse them, but they're really different. Knowledge is theoretical and practical understanding of a subject. I know mathematics inside and out. I have knowledge of mathematics. I have a degree in mathematics, so there's my knowledge. Now, skills is the proficiency to develop through education and training. Well, that's what I did. I learned through a master's degree in education and a master's degree in mathematics, right? These are these proficiencies that I developed over time. But my abilities are these innate things. And that's what we're trying to do with the Portrait of a Nevada Learner, is pull out these innate, these natural things that are sitting inside of us. We are naturally want to collaborate. We naturally want to be empowered. We naturally want to thrive. These things that are innate inside of us. But what we have to do is create a classroom full of pedagogy that allows our students to do that. So let me give you an example that's innate. Throwing. Throwing is innate. Every baby, every 2-year-old, every 4-year-old is looking to throw things. Now, they don't always, right, are good at it, but throwing is an innate ability. It's something that everybody has done. It's innate inside of us. But guess what? That understanding of throwing, it is not going to lead me to the understanding of the rules of baseball or wanting to be a pitcher down the line. Being a pitcher takes skills, being able to throw that ball over the plate. But that innate ability to throw a ball was in all of us. But if I can get the knowledge of a baseball, how baseball works, then I can start thinking about how can I throw a pitch right over the plate, or how can I throw a ball to the first base to get somebody out. So that's how knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I want you to start thinking about the abilities part. What are those innate natural talents that are already inside of our students that we can pull out? That's what we're looking for, is those things to be able to pull out. So when I think of these things, what I like to think about is starting with the abilities. And I like to go, first thing is to the 16 habits of mind. And if you haven't looked at those, they're in the Canvas course. Guys, spend some time looking at these 16 habits. And like persevering is like one of them. Persisting, right, is like in there. Being flexible, finding humor, some of those things that we really talked about but the Portrait of a Nevada Learner, these are the things we want to pull out of our students. And then the skills, we can have our kids practice them in that 1/3 balance that you heard me talking about. Having students work individually, having students work as groups, having direct instruction, having a nice 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 where they can rehearse or practice these abilities that they have innately. We want to set up our classroom, our pedagogy, that allows them to practice flexibility, gathering data, problem solving with guess and check. But we also want them to have that knowledge, that academic success, understanding it's okay to not know and how to climb out of that pit using those strategies to success. So one of the things that are going to be important as you move forward and you start thinking about bringing in learner profiles into your classroom is having a shared common language. IB does this really well. They have 10 what they call attributes that is in their profile. So they can ask students, when are you taking risks? When are you being open-minded? Are you being a thinker right now? Are you being reflective right now? They have this language that they can come to. Well, Nevada is really pushing that with our Portrait of a Nevada Learner. We're talking about empowering, and what does empowering look like? We're talking about impacting and connecting and thriving. And what does that look like? It's giving us a common language for us to think through and helping our students pull out those innate abilities and using classroom pedagogy to give them an opportunity to strive for that. So when we think of a profile, it is something that is created by a student, and it's more than a survey. What it really does is it captures their capabilities, an individual learner's characteristics, and their aptitudes as a learner. So these About Me surveys that we do are great. It's a great way to get to know our students, but I want the students to own this. And that's what a learner profile is we want them to own it. So here's an example. And you're going to find the same example inside the Canvas course. This is Dennis. Dennis is a high school freshman. He gives us a nice picture of him and some of the things that he likes, like the Seahawks and the Ducks. You know, he must live up in northern Oregon or Seattle area, right? He loves athletics. He volunteers. He loves hard rock. So it gives us some ideas about who he is. But also, if we look at this, it also gives us some of his skills and attributes. That he has a great sense of humor, that he's empathetic, he's very physical. I love that he puts icons on his profile here, because I can look at those icons and I can say, he likes, you know, sports, athletics, weights. He likes golf. These gives me some real quick things that I can learn about him just by looking at these pictures. But also he talks about his likes and his dislikes. Like he says, treat me like an adult. I'm 15. Don't treat me like I'm a kid. And he stutters, and notice what he says there. I need to remember that I need to breathe through my stuttering. And what works for me is I need movement breaks. But what doesn't work for me is when you rush me, when you set low expectations, when there are no sensory breaks. Talking over me frustrates the heck out of me, right? So notice what we're learning, and he owns this profile. He absolutely owns this profile. We look at it and we give it right back to them. So what we've done is I've created a sample profile, and you're going to see it inside of our Canvas course, that is built on what you see right there from Dennis. So it's got like the student's name, his strengths and attributes, some of the visions and goals that he has for himself, and what works for him and what doesn't. And what we have in this sample one is there's going to be links to sample characteristics and sample statements that'll help our students build out their profile. On the second page of the profile, I want them to set goals. I want them to think about, what is the desired grade you want in mathematics? What do you need to do to get that desired grade? And I want you to track data. Like it could be, I want you to track how much, lessons that you've done in iReady this week or accelerated learning. Setting goals helps our students think about themselves as a learner. So what I did is I actually put in these sample statements so that helps students find, that they can find what to write here. So when you see that template, you're going to see a link out to sample profile statements. And you're going to see a link out to characteristic traits. Why do we always talk about characteristics in a book and we're not talking about characteristics in ourselves? We want our students to look for those characteristics in themselves. Are they courageous? Are they kind? Are they trustworthy? These are things we want them to put up on their learner profile if that's them. We want them to really reflect on themselves as a learner. So you'll see those links to those extra pieces. And also what you'll find in our Canvas course is my profile. And you'll notice all the things that I've built out that talks a little bit about me. You can see how you can build this out and you learn a lot about the person. I'm going to suggest that you too, as a learner, an adult lifelong learner, create a profile that you share with your students. So in the Canvas course, you're going to see lots of samples. You can use Google Slides or Google Documents. I gave you my template, but you can use whatever template you want. There are various layouts and designs, or you can create your own. But what you really want to do is you want your students to fill in their strengths, their challenges, their preference, how they learn best, when they learn best, right? And then we want to use that learner profile so that we can identify students' strengths and weaknesses, their learning styles, like we did at the beginning of today's class when you guys told me you're visual or auditorial. And that helps us when we create lessons and we plan for accommodations, even when we group students so that we can strategically group students together, like students together, or maybe a balance of different learners together. We want to use these profiles to help us differentiate, right? So thinking about, how do I differentiate content? How can I differentiate assignments or assessments, or maybe even the path? And I can use them for one-on-one conferencing when I'm meeting with parents or meeting just with the students, helping me figure out what the small group check-ins are going to look like, and thinking through what are those adaptations that I need to do, maybe just for one or two individual students, because they have different needs. So we can vary the learning based on those profiles. Now, when you're in secondary, you can share those profiles very easy. They can be done in one classroom and shared with all other teachers using a Canvas course, because they're going to be cloud-based, either like a Google Doc or a Google slideshow. So you could just set up an assignment in your LMS and have the kids link them to them. So every teacher, all 6 of their teachers, get the learner profile. They can share it with all their teachers. They can set individual class goals in math, in science, and social studies, right? And then you as a teacher can look at those profiles and you can say, whoa, my 5th period class, they're all very kinesthetic. And so I might need to do 5th period different than the way I teach 3rd period. So using those profiles and sharing those profiles among teachers helps us get to those levels. So remember, the profiles are not just a one and done. They should be revisited quarterly, even mid-year, so that students can change. Because I don't know about you, but when Christmas rolls around, January, those kids come back different. They are totally different. When they left, they were this little 3rd grader that I really liked. They came back in January and they've grown 6 inches and they're totally different. Or even the same thing happens with our freshmen and our seniors in high school. They all change. I don't know what it is. So we want them to go back and revisit that profile, and us to revisit our definitions of learning, our definitions and roles, expectations, and procedures. So we want it to be very dynamic as we go through there, and we're setting up our data and setting our own goals. So again, the way to get started is identify some common language so that you guys understand with your students, what is a critical thinker? What are those things? We want to use a template. We want to think about that learning profile, give them some common language about the dip or the pit, right? Defining those roles, and then determining how to, use the feedback, because you want the profile, but you don't want to keep it, because we want them to use it. We want to use it in one-on-one conferences with them and also with their parents, right? We want them to set goals. We want them to look at their quarterly grades and think through it. And of course, we want you to create your own profile that you can share with your students. That's a great way to start with an example